I told him about my plans to continue my studies in the United States, and he said it's a fantastic idea. I will sign your recommendation letter, but you can write it yourself and print it on my letterhead. And I said, that sounds really lovely. I will come back next week. But in the meantime, can I work for you while I do my applications? And he said, which really shocked me, absolutely not. You learned everything there you need to know. And I know for sure that you will open a gallery opposite of me, and I will look out on my window on the Rokin every day and see how well you do. You will never work for me again. There's nothing for you to learn anymore.
Presented by Arcarta, the anti-fraud and customer due diligence network for the art world, The Bigger Picture presents a special series of episodes in partnership with London Art Week. A showcase of the best the art market has to offer, we take an inside look at the galleries participating and the stories behind the people that shape them. As a child growing up in Amsterdam, Mireille Mosler preferred to wait in the car on family outings to museums and galleries. When it came to choosing a career, however, she knew she wanted to be an art dealer in America, but not before figuring out how to get there. Stepping off a plane in 1992 for an internship with Christie's, it was her first sale of a painting that would become the lifeline, enabling her to stay and pursue her dream of dealing art in New York City. So you've been involved in the art world for over 35 years, and today, while you specialise in Dutch works on paper, you also deal in American conceptual art, seeing you cover a large area of history in which you have a master's degree. You take part in London Art Week, of course, exhibit at Master Drawings, TAFAF, and have placed works in numerous museums like the Met and the Getty. Clearly then, you found your place in the art world. Unusually, however, you have no immediate family connections to art. In fact, as a youngster during family trips to the museum, you preferred to wait in the car park. Curiously, when it came to choosing an area of study at university, you picked art history. So what made you choose something like this, having no prior interest, and how did your father react?
I'm not sure if I planned to study art history. It just, in Holland, unlike in the United States, you just apply to school a few weeks before you go. You don't have to go through a very lengthy process. You just get a brochure, and it has hundreds of choices in like 5 major cities. And I really stared at this list for a long time. And my father was a lawyer and expected us to go in either law or finance. But neither one seemed very appealing to me. So I looked through the entire list, and I thought that I had no understanding of what art was. It was a real question. I also didn't really understand anything about the universe, but I thought astronomy is a little bit above my level. I wasn't very good at physics. So I thought, like, well, maybe I can solve the question for myself, what art is. So that seemed like a good choice. And I thought it was expected for me to go to college. So there was no question that I could get around that. But it seemed genuinely interest, and I never looked back. I never doubted my choice. I liked it from day one.
But in spite of your father's advice, then, you did enrol at the University of Amsterdam in 1985. And on the first day, however, you received a sobering lesson. Tell us about the speech the dean gave, and how did it make you feel?
It started very exciting. I started with 200 other students, but on the first day, the dean said that most of us actually had made a wrong choice. And of course, the basis for my interest was already very iffy. So I got really nervous. He said that the majority of people probably should go to an art academy instead, or were there for the wrong reasons, and that eventually only about 20 people, or less than 10% of us, would graduate. And I thought that wouldn't apply to me. So that didn't defer me. But he also said that of those 20 people that would graduate, almost nobody would find a job. There were very few, and there still are very few jobs in academia, and it would be almost impossible to find a job in a museum, and that was it. He didn't mention the art market, of course. It was a very Marxist oriented program still at the time. And I was very concerned. I really was committed to the study, but I was concerned about what would happen to me 6 years later. So on my first day, I immediately went to my father and asked him what to do when you have a degree in art history. And he was like, "You file for unemployment. That's what you do. That's what you signed up for." So that really worried me. And I wanted to work as a professional and make this my career. So he arranged for me to work in a library at a big Dutch 17th century old master paintings dealer in Amsterdam. And that's what I did.
Now, this is interesting, though, because the dean is saying it's very unlikely that you'll find positions in employment. So few of you will actually, go through the system and come out on the other side smelling of roses, if you will. But you actually did, in fact, you interned at a museum.
Yes, I did that too. I really started to work on my first day in the university. The first week I started, and I had an arrangement that I could work every hour, every time. Everything in Amsterdam is very close and nearby, and I could come into the library whenever I had time or whenever I wanted. So it would work out really, really well. But then in my second year to university, I wanted to do an internship in a museum to see if that's something I wanted to do. Working in a gallery, it's always a family business, so there is very limited career opportunities. In Holland, there's not even such a thing as a gallery director or manager. Staff is very small, and it's always the family and the owners who are the decision makers. So I didn't really think that could be a career, being a dealer, especially since I don't have any family members that have galleries. So I didn't really think that was a career.
You didn't think it was a career initially?
No, unless you want to be an assistant the rest of your life. In Holland, that would not have, and still in the old master field, that would not be a real option. It's almost all family oriented or very small operations.
So what about your experience in the museum? How did that go down? Did it appeal?
Not at all. I didn't like the bureaucratic component of it. I was tasked with preparing a summer exhibition of the sculpture collection of Museum Boijmans, together with a catalog. And the catalog was very challenging because there wasn't any good record keeping. And I learned a very valuable lesson, because in the art market, in a gallery, you do research very fast because the deadline is a simple brochure, a catalog, or a sales pitch to a client or an art fair. But at the museum, where things have been for sometimes decades, in the case of contemporary art, it was astounding how little record keeping there was and how essential it is to get that right. Things were donated to the museum, but then there was very little archival material to go with. So it made the collection catalog, that also was never published, it made it very difficult to do. And then the exhibition, it was very fascinating because this is all before there were proper databases. So we went basically to storage to look at what was there, and we discovered things, made a selection. There was a very big Walter de Maria sculpture that had not been installed since it was conceived for the museum. So that was super exciting to install that and see that come to life. It's an amazing, really an amazing piece. But the bureaucracy, the endless meetings, that had nothing to do with the summer show didn't appeal to me at all. I didn't see myself working in a bigger organization where there's a certain accountability and also slowing down in a decision-making process.
You didn't want to be
I went back to the gallery.
You didn't want to be a cog in a big machine, basically. That's what it sounds like.
I think my problem was maybe with the structure of doing things, not doing things together in a team. I actually really like that. But the power structure and how things get decided, that not necessarily someone's best idea, someone who is on top of it gets to make the decisions. And that's a good thing, because if everybody was just executing their own decisions, there wouldn't be management in a museum. But it can also be frustrating. And I mean, not for me, I was just an intern, but I could see the frustration between colleagues, and these inner workings just didn't appeal to me.
Didn't appeal. So what you have made reference to already, but I'd like to just dive some more into this aspect of your career. Your father introduced you to K&V Waterman in Amsterdam, and you've made reference to them already, but Karel himself, the owner and the director, would become somewhat of a mentor, I think, to you. What were some of the important lessons he taught you, and how did this real world education you were having at the time at university differ to your academic one? How did the two compare?
At the gallery, I learned how to quickly write something very simple that was maybe a little bit amusing or entertaining and not scholarly, but to do proper research nevertheless, to make sure attributions are correct and provenance is established. Working together with scholars, always finding the importance of the scholar's opinion, making the right connections, establishing that network, and really cherishing these connections. They would always hire prominent scholars to write their exhibition catalogs or to just do research on specific paintings, and we had an almost complete library and an image system, an image library, and scholars would also come there to look up information. So it was the library was very big, in a very prominent 17th century, very big gallery. So it was a very lively coming and going. I really liked that they had a restoration studio, which is maybe a little bit controversial. That as a gallery, you have an in-house restoration studio with 2 full-time restorers. But it was super fascinating because you could see a painting come in and being cleaned, and the cleaning process is just very fascinating. And most restorers will make you come in to look at the progress they make, but it's not the same as being able to go a few times a day to look at how things are going, and just really spending time in the restoration studio and see what kind of decisions could be made in and how the whole process works. What kind of varnishes work and don't work. I learned a lot from hands-on experience. We had like a whole attic with frames, like which frames work, which frames don't work. The framer would fly in from London to look at all the new pictures and then make frame designs. Now all of that goes by JPEG, but at the time it was still, people would actually come on a flight and you would write a letter and say, I need so and so many frames. And I learned a lot from them, like talking to people, like what your options are, looking at what other frames looked like or other framing examples. So I really liked the entire process, from seeing a painting come in. Sometimes the painting wouldn't be good enough to actually make it to the gallery floor, so it would be like covered up again with a yellow varnish and go to auction or some other some other outlets. But I really like that entire process and the hands-on part of it too.
The hands-on aspect in particular sounds like it appeals.
Yeah, in a museum, you're not really supposed to handle, unless you work in a print room, you're not really supposed to handle the objects. Whereas in a gallery, it doesn't matter how expensive the painting is. If a client comes in or framer, you're the one who has to touch the object. And I actually like that. And I actually liked to see and I'm sure a lot of curators like that too. They love the thrill of finding an artwork and buying it. But they will usually buy it from a dealer or at an auction house that these days also has almost everything restored and framed already. And it's exciting to go through that process yourself with the object.
Let's go back now to obviously the period in time when you've graduated, and it's interesting because a vision seems to materialize almost with certainty. I think this, given the experience you're talking about here, you kind of know what you want to do now, and you know where you wanted to be. You wanted to study in the US, you wanted to work in the US, in the business of dealing in art, but you would need to do two things: work in the immediate and get a recommendation. So you went to Carell and you asked if he could help. What happened?
I told him about my plans to continue my studies in the United States, and he said, "It's a fantastic idea. I will sign your recommendation letter, but you can write it yourself and print it on my letterhead." And I said, "That sounds really lovely. I will come back next week. But in the meantime, can I work for you while I do my applications?" And he said, which really shocked me, "Absolutely not. You learned everything there you need to know. And I know for sure that you will open a gallery opposite of me, and I will look out of my window on the Rokin every day and see how well you do. You will never work for me again. Um, there's nothing for you to learn anymore." And I didn't really take it as a compliment. I thought I was a little bit disappointed, but since I didn't want to work for them anymore and I really wanted to go to the United States, I didn't give it too much thought. But unfortunately, he passed away the following week. So he never got to sign my recommendation letter. And very shortly after that, his son, Victor Waterman, phoned me and asked if I could come and work at the gallery again. And I had a huge moral dilemma because his father had just told me that I could never come back. And I told him that. I said, "I'm honored that you asked me, but it's a little problematic because your father didn't want me back." And he said, "I know. That's exactly the reason that I'm calling you, because he was sure that you would open your own gallery. And perhaps you could help me run this gallery." And that's what we did. But what I also learned from working there, they really had the gallery together, and it was a interesting and beautiful collaboration. The father was really sort of the mastermind, the dealer, wheeler, and the son was really the eye. And neither one could run the business without the other. But that doesn't really mean, first of all, it was very young, but it doesn't really mean that one of them could be replaced by an outsider. It was a sort of weird family dynamic that was also into play. And probably when you're father and son, there's very little you have to say. You just do these things together. Whereas if you're employee and employer, it becomes a little bit more complicated to divide tasks. So after probably a year, I decided that that wasn't going to work and that I still wanted to go to the United States. In the beginning, I thought that I could open for them the New York Waterman Gallery. That was really something I was hoping for, but became very clear to me that the son wasn't able or interested actually to run a gallery. So I didn't really leave. It sort of really stopped to exist, and the gallery closed, and I went to the United States.
Somehow you managed to secure an internship at Christie's, first in Amsterdam and then the US connection in New York in the old master department. Take us back to that moment. How did it feel stepping off the plane? in New York for the first time?
Very exciting. First day, I knew, I knew this is where I'm gonna stay. It was if you can fall in love with a city, I definitely had that feeling that I was in love, and it really happened on the first day. I didn't plan to immigrate. I left with just a suitcase with my clothes. I did secure a very beautiful rent-controlled apartment through a friend. I didn't know anybody. That friend was a friend in Amsterdam who was very lucky that she knew a New York artist who had fallen in love with a Dutch boy, so he needed someone to take over his place. And I didn't realize how special that was because I had one of the most affordable, beautiful apartments from day one. And I really liked going to Christie's and being part of the art market here. I already knew some of the dealers, of course, that would come in, but I had to learn everything from scratch. I didn't, although I spoke English, I had a very difficult time understanding accents, and I had to answer the phones in the department. So if someone would call from the South or from Texas, it was almost a foreign language to me. Like I also didn't really understand how Americans pronounce European artist names. So it wouldn't always click with me which artists they were referring to, and that took a while before I became more proficient in English and I understood how things were done. Like just the formality of a phone call is so different in the Netherlands than it's here. So it was a very useful learning experience.
There's a problem though, I think, because being an internship, this wasn't forever, and you've mentioned a rent-controlled apartment, but you needed to find and secure work to secure a visa. You needed an income. How did you cover your rent?
I had sold before I left. I had sold one painting. I had bought my first painting when I was still in Amsterdam, and I sold it right before I left. It was very lucky, and that gave me enough savings to, I don't know, to survive for at least half a year. But it was very careful. I wasn't living the fast life in. I wasn't living the fast life here, but I was very careful and I managed. But the visa was the bigger problem. I really needed, and also in order to travel back and forth, I really needed a sponsor to get a visa. And I asked, which is very easy because there's so few old master dealers in that, and I have to be specific in Dutch art because there are also dealers in Italian art, but that's not my specialty or connoisseurship. So it was very easy to contact all the dealers and ask them for work. And everybody has a very small outfit and only one assistant. And I happened to be very lucky that Jack's assistant had just left, and it was like perfect timing. So I started to work for Jack Kilgore, who was then specialized in Dutch 17th century Mannerist paintings. And so it was a perfect fit and a very easy visa application.
How did what you learnt with Jack differ to what you'd learnt with Karel Waterman?
Jack has a more intellectual approach to art dealing. I would say Waterman was like an old-fashioned dealer. It could have been anything, could have been cars or any other commodity. It just happened to be 17th century Dutch paintings, whereas Jack had an innate interest for art, including art in museums. So his standards for his own art collecting and dealing were very high. It wasn't all about making money. It was about being the best sort of dealer and getting the best paintings and paintings that interest him. Whereas at Waterman, the eye on commerce was really everything that mattered. So it was interesting to see that you could do both successfully, but with coming from very different interests.
I mean, Jack gave you more broadly a very Well, he gave you an amazing opportunity, really. Tell us what happened.
I worked for Jack for 10 years, and I was able to use my connections in Holland and source material for him, make connections with Dutch clients and colleagues, and bring things to the US, and help him also develop his gallery. So I assume we could do a little bit more, because I would bring in my own contacts and paintings, and that allowed him to, because I wanted to be a little bit more than an assistant. I wanted to also deal. So it allowed him also to travel and leave the organization and the management of the gallery to me while he was exploring the art market in a broader sense. In the end, there was 1 year where he actually completely left, and he ran a family business. And I would speak to him once a day during his lunch hour, but the rest of the day or week, I couldn't talk to him. So I knew he would call every day, but that was it. And that year, I went by myself to Maastricht to install the booth, and he would come for the opening and stay during the fair. But I was there for 1 year. I had to do everything on my own. I'm not even sure if outsiders noticed that he was gone, but I was very honored that I could run the gallery, and that I had that trust. It was very interesting, because I really felt it wasn't my name; it was his name, of course, but I felt it was I could learn how to run have my own gallery, and how it would be to be out on my own. I had my own assistant. It was a very interesting year.
I mean, you've mentioned it, I think, an important word already here, trust. What do you think Jack saw in you that saw him give you such freedom to run the gallery for a year?
Well, you would have to ask Jack. I think it's my honesty, which is maybe also my flaw, that I say maybe too much or speak my mind too openly. But if you get past that, or it doesn't bother you, or it's not offensive to you, it's probably my honesty that made him trust me with his money, and especially his reputation. And I did well. I mean, I didn't do anything that he was embarrassed about, or that he didn't want me to do. I think I'm very capable. It's also when I work for private collectors. Like, I don't buy art that I like. I mean, in an ideal world, that would be the case. People would just give me their credit card and I would go out shopping. But I try to do things that my clients want to own or want to see. So I think I'm very well equipped to put my own ego, or sometimes even taste, aside, and transport myself in how somebody else wants something. How does somebody else want something installed in their home? It's not necessarily how I would do it, but I try to please my clients and think of what they really like and why they like certain artworks, and follow that lead.
Let's fast forward to 2004, where you start dealing under your own name. What prompted you to strike out on your own exactly?
The only reason I went out on my own is that I became a mom in 2003. And I really couldn't combine motherhood and working full time and travel, and having a very heavy travel schedule. It just didn't sit well with me. The first year I did Maastricht, I took my baby with me, which is a horrible idea, but it never crossed my mind, I guess, to leave the baby at home for 3 weeks. And Jack allowed me to do, like, to his credit, he allowed me to do all of that. But it didn't, especially the traveling, it didn't it didn't make any sense. I thought I could do things more efficiently from home. So that's the only reason that it wasn't ambition or something. It was more a necessity that I wanted to have complete freedom to be with my child whenever it was necessary or needed.
This is your son, Max.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll come back to your son in a moment. But invariably, during a career dealing in art, there are sometimes, hopefully, important discoveries that a dealer will make. Now, a few years ago, the only signed drawing by a particular artist, not already in an institution, turned up in a recycling store in the Netherlands. Taking it to TEFAF, it attracted the attention of the Getty. What happened exactly, and how do you establish provenance for something so important?
It was a drawing I saw. Usually during the summer, I spent the entire summer with my son Max in Amsterdam. And since the American school vacations are so long, that means like I'm there for 3 months. And I have the opportunity to meet people and to look at art. And someone showed me this amazing drawing by Klaas van Beresteyn. And he was an artist from an aristocratic family and wasn't living off his art. He did join the guild, but he wasn't very prolific. And there are only about 40 drawings attributed to him, of which there are only 4 signed works known. And someone showed me the drawing, and it seemed actually really unbelievable to me that there was still a drawing on the art market. And I asked if I could take it with me and show it at TEFAF. When runners come to you with work, or in general, people never reveal to you where things come from out of confidentiality, but also the fear that you then go directly to the owner and say, hey, I'm such and so, can we cut out the middleman and can I deal directly with you? And it even happens when you buy artwork at auction. You don't know who the consignor is. They won't reveal to you for that same purpose. Sometimes the name of the collector is in the catalog, but that's very rare. So I didn't really think that much of it. And the artwork was published, there was consensus, and the fact that it's the only signed drawing made it seem very easy for me to sell it to basically almost any American museum. The Met had bought a drawing by the same artist, but that turned out to be the wrong attribution. So I thought it would be easy. Only the MFA in Boston has a drawing by this artist. So I thought it would be easy for me to sell. So the Getty acquired the drawing, and I was very excited about that. But the Getty is also a museum that is the most conscientious about provenance. So they asked me all these questions, and I thought, like, well, it was with a family member who had bought it at auction in 1918. He died in 1948. There couldn't be a problem. It was within this family during the wartime. I didn't see it as any problem. But they were adamant that I needed to establish the full provenance for the last 50, 60 years, which seemed impossible. And the runner, who I asked several times, refused to reveal where it came from. And then it came to a point where I said, well, it's the Getty. I'm sorry, I have to sign the liability off, and it's really a deal breaker. You have to tell me where it came from. And then I need to see the invoice. He didn't have an invoice. That sounded really horrible. But it turned out that he had bought it at a recycling store, and not just a regular recycling store, but one of those workshops that employ disabled people to integrate them in, or to not even integrate them, but to give them something to do and make them part of society, but also to prevent stuff going into landfills. So they have, luckily for them, this was such a major find too. They didn't really know what they had, but it realized that a lot of money for them. So they had made a little video on YouTube where a local reporter had come into the recycling store, and they showed how the how the drawing had come in. It had come in a big truck with like the entire contents of some deceased person's home, and then people go and sort through. They do coffee cups with coffee cups and pictures with pictures, and they showed all the bins, and they established the real provenance. And then the Getty provenance researcher found out that one of the heirs had died previous month, and that was how the provenance was complete. But it's a shocking story that something like that could end up in almost in a landfill.
Now, while your area of specialism is, as you've already said, Dutch works on paper, you've recently been very focused on symbolism and European art from the turn of the 19th century. What can you share about what you're uncovering in your study, and what makes the work of someone like Elizabeth Sunrail important?
I seem to pivot all the time, and it's basically also based on what my clients are interested in or where they bring me. And symbolism in general is something that's very much coveted by American museums and also collected in the United States by private collectors. But Dutch symbolism is very rarely represented here, so I thought I could expand a little bit because, once my specialty is Dutch art, I could also expand to the late 19th century. Artists like Jan Toorop, who everybody here has heard of. Other artists are lesser known. But since it's so difficult to find material, and since I can't be always picky, I would be lovely to do a Jan Toorop show, but it's not going to happen. I will show everything that I come across that I actually find of interest. And Elizabeth Sunrail is a very large watercolor that was recently acquired by the Ashmolean in Oxford. Besides that, it is objectively a really beautiful drawing. Many museums, if not all, are now interested in acquiring art by female artists. And especially in the 19th century, or even before that, in the 17th century, female artists weren't allowed to become part of the guilds. So it was more difficult for them to establish a career. There are some very great examples, but they're very rare and far in between. But even in the 19th century, women weren't allowed to study at the academy because there were new models. They were allowed to exhibit at the salons, but usually their work was hung behind a door frame or very high up. They are almost never reviewed. It wasn't an easy career path for a woman. And most of them are in the shadow of their male mentors or teachers. Probably most famous example is Camille Claudel. So I do think Sunrail is an important artist, but it's maybe even more important that her career and her work showcases how you can be forgotten without good cause.
Yeah, let's just pursue this theme in a little more detail, and explore this idea of having to overcome obstacles, whether that be cultural or societal, because I think it's important that people understand that what your mother has actually gone through and what she's had to overcome. And she actually, as a child, had to avoid Dutch Nazi collaborators, and she had to change her identity and her name, and she lived with a family called the Salters. And I wonder what the impact of that has been on you growing up. And you kind of say, you mentioned earlier, you wouldn't class yourself as ambitious, but you've certainly covered a huge distance. And, I've had to overcome, I think, a few different challenges of your own. How has your mother's story influenced you, do you think?
You should have me analyzed by a therapist. I would almost say it's not a drive. It's to be adopted as a child and not knowing if your family, your biological parents are still alive is a huge hindrance. And I don't think it's a quality that informs you as a parent. I think it sets you back and probably gives an innate insecurity. So I would say instead of a drive, my insecurities and doubts probably stem from that more than that it gives you any sort of sense of survival. I would almost say it's the opposite. It's probably something. It's not something that has ever been spoken about in my family. But if I would self-analyze, I would say it instills insecurity rather than confidence.
You mentioned your son Max already, and you were both once part of the Rabbit Task Force, which I think is really quite sweet. And I wondered, as growing up with yourself, how has Max taken an interest in art? How has dealing in art influenced your role as a parent?
I would say it's the other way around. My son has influenced my career as a dealer because I wouldn't have gone out on my own if it wasn't for my son. I would have loved to have job security and work in tandem with somebody else. I like collaboration. I like to not be the sole decision maker, but actually discuss things and look at artworks together with other people. But he forced me to, not force me, but I choose because of my need to spend more time with my child. I choose to go out on my own and leave some things behind that I couldn't do because I didn't want to travel that much. But it also made me realize that you don't have to have every day 2-hour luncheons and dinners at night. I've flown I don't know how many times to Europe for a day without even sleeping, spending a night or just one night. Um, I've been to multiple cities in very few days. It's all manageable. It's You can be very efficient. I realized that being part of a dealer is very much also the social aspect, having dinners with colleagues and clients, but one could do without it too. And people do understand that if you're a parent, that there are certain limitations of your availability. But Max is not so interested in art. He's more the waterman model. He, from a very, I think his first word, I'm not sure, was money. I thought it was mommy, and I was thrilled. And my husband said, I don't think he said mommy. I think he said money. And that's basically sums it up. From a very young age, like, as I said, he was with me in Maastricht, and I've always taken him with me because even on vacations or traveling, like, I look at art wherever I go, and I'm not much of a beach person or anything like that. But he usually would, if I come home or at a dinner table, I say, like, I sold this and that, his first question was always like, how much did you make? And I would make it into math lesson and tell him the purchase price and the sales price and let him figure it out. But that's, I think, his fascination with art dealing, not the art itself. But there are certain things that he has seen because I work from home now, and there are certain things he has seen that he really liked and that he was very sorry that I sold. So that I appreciate.
I want you to think now back to when you were getting off the plane in New York the first time on your placement with Christie's, and with the benefit of experience, if you could go back and give yourself at the start of your journey advice, what would it be?
To take a public speaking course, to overcome certain neuroses and get self-confidence. I think I would have, if I could really go back in time, I would have forced myself to take a year off to be a teacher, specifically in art history. And I think, speaking when I was young, when I worked at Waterman Gallery, I took a part-time sales position at a clothing store because I really wanted to learn how to sell and apply that to art, how to work in a sales team. I really made from from the beginning, I was very goal oriented. But one thing I didn't do was speaking in public. I always thought it was something that I would grow into over time. And it's something I didn't grow into over time. I'm one of those people who has questions when there's a lecture, but I will not raise my hand because I won't speak in public. So I won't be able to even ask a very simple, straightforward question. And that's something that I wish I had tackled at the beginning of my career.
Thank you for listening. You can follow and subscribe to The Bigger Picture wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about this episode or to reach out to us directly, please visit arcarta.com.